Thank you, Ms. Friedman. That's all the questions that I have. Will please stay on the line. The hearing officer or the parent's attorney may have additional questions.
Thank you. Mr. Foley, do you have any redirect?
I have none. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, Ms. Friedman, you are free to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. It is now time for closing statements. Mr. Dolce, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, HO. As we have seen, this case involves a student for whom several or multiple educational programs have been developed since this student was first identified as a student with disabilities by the New York City Department of Education. At the outset, the DOE submits that the appropriate standard to be applied in this case is the Burlington-Carter analysis. SRO appeal numbers 21-245, 23-143, 23-066, among many others, all stand for the proposition that in equitable services cases where parents have unilaterally obtained services for their children, determining whether parents are entitled to public funding of those services requires application of the same Burlington-Carter analysis used in cases alleging violations of the IDEA. And it's through that lens I show that we must view the facts of this case. Those facts show that the DOE developed an IESP for this student most recently on May 22nd, 2023. And that program recommends that this student receive 4 periods of special education teacher support service delivered in a group setting in Yiddish each week, as well as 2 30-minute sessions of speech and language therapy, one delivered on an individual basis and one delivered in a group setting, both in Yiddish each week, 1 30-minute counseling session delivered on an individual basis in Yiddish, and 2 30-minute physical therapy sessions delivered on an individual basis in English. Parent is challenging the most recent IESP developed for this student in favor of a preschool IEP developed for the student in 2017. The DOE submits that the appropriate program for this student is the IESP developed in May 2023. And that contention is supported by the narrative contained within the IESP itself, as well as the expansion of services offered or recommended for this student for the then 23-24, now 24-25 school year. The DOE further submits that the provider agency witness testified that it was likely this student would make progress receiving the services recommended in the most recent IESP developed for this student. And so the DOE submits that all of this goes to show that this student was appropriately evaluated and that the DOE made set appropriate goals and made appropriate recommendations for services that would permit this student to make meaningful progress and achieve those goals for the 23-24 and now 24-25 school year. The DOE submits that the parent has not shown that the recommendations contained in the 2017 preschool IEP developed for the student are appropriate for the 24-25 school year. The evidence shows that that 2017 IEP recommends the student receive 5 periods of SEIT services, which was only minimally reduced in the most recent IESP developed for the student to 4 periods. The 2017 IEP recommends the student receive 2 30-minute speech and language therapy services, which remain the same in the 24-20 or in the most recent IESP recommended for this student. Parents Preferred Program recommends the student receive 2 30-minute sessions of physical therapy, which again remains the same in the most recent IESP developed for the student. But the most recent IESP also expands services to recommend counseling services for the student, which the provider agency witness testified the student would likely benefit from. And so all this shows that the IESP most recently developed for the student is the appropriate program for the student entering the 24-25 school year. Even if we were to apply Parents Preferred Program in this case, we see that Parents Preferred Program omits critical elements of the services recommended for this student even at that time. The evidence shows that the student is not presently receiving speech and language therapy services and physical therapy services. And while the agency witness relayed parents' intent to find providers for those services, The evidence clearly shows that the agency that parents selected to provide SET services also provides speech and language therapy services and physical therapy services, and the agency provider witness was not aware of whether the parent requested those services for the summer or later sessions. And in fact, the contract signed by the parent and the agency shows that the only services requested by the parent are what are phrased as see it services in the contract. So the program implemented by the parent omits critical elements of the holistic program developed for the student, even attempting to implement parents' preferred preschool program from 7 years ago. Additionally, the evidence shows that the program implemented by the parent implements individualized SET services despite more recent recommendations that this student receive those services in a group setting, and that the student is recommended to receive those services in Yiddish. However, the provider providing services to this student does not possess a bilingual extension to provide services in the manner recommended. All of this goes to show that the program implemented by the parent is so inconsistent with the programs is so inconsistent with both parents' preferred 27 preschool IEP and the more recent IESP developed for the student as to not permit the student to make meaningful progress. And the program implemented by the parent is not specifically tailored to the needs of the student, developed in a manner which would directly address the particular needs of this student for the 24-25 school year. So for all these reasons, IHO, the evidence shows that the program implemented by the parent, despite the availability of appropriate services, appropriate delivery options from parents' chosen agency, is not appropriate for the goals and recommendations contained on the most recent IESP, which the DOE submits as appropriate for the student, or parents' preferred IEP developed for this program. And so in no case is parent entitled to relief based on prong 2 of the Burlington-Carter analysis, because parent has not shown that the program that parent implemented is appropriate for the student for the 24-25 school year. If this case were to survive the challenge to under prong 2, then the DOE submits that the rate demanded by the parent for direct funding of parent's implemented program is not reasonable in light of the services recommended for the student, the services that the student is actually receiving, or the certifications and qualifications of the providers providing those services. The evidence shows parents signed a contract with the provider agency and agreed to pay $200 per hour for sets, or in the contract, see it services. The evidence further shows that of the $200 per hour billed to parent, the provider receives $100 per hour. If we review DOE Exhibit 1, we can examine reasonable market rates in light of student grade level and provider certification, education and experience level. First, we turn to Table A7 appearing on DOE Exhibit 1-18, which is an inflation-adjusted hourly compensation rate based on student grade level. We see for students in middle school, as is the case with this student who is enrolled in 5th grade, market rates range from a 10th percentile of $71.51 per hour up to a 90th percentile of $150.55 per hour, with a 50th percentile of $96.23 per hour, which closely correlates with the provider pay rate in this case. Additionally, we can turn to Table A13, where we see an inflation-adjusted hourly compensation schedule based on provider education and experience level. In this case, we see the provider for the student was first certified to teach students with disabilities of any grade level in 2018, and therefore possesses 6 years of experience prior to the start of the 24-25 school year. It warrants a rate of between $83.20 per hour and $86.40 per hour, assuming that this provider possesses a bachelor's degree in their field. So the DOE submits that even in the light most favorable to the parent in this case, the reasonable employee cost is no greater than $100 per hour. The DOE Exhibit 1 on pages 9 and 11 calculates that a reasonable overhead cost based on employee costs is 8.3% greater than the employee cost to the agency, which in this case would create a reasonable market rate of $108.30 per hour. The DOE has maintained through recent school years that a reasonable market rate for sets in the New York City area is $125 per hour, which in this case would permit a 25% overhead cost above the cost of employee to parents' chosen agency. The DOE submits that that is a reasonable rate for services for this student, despite the inconsistencies in implementation and delivery services with the IEP and IESP. Additionally, the DOE submits that a 10-month school year consists of 36 weeks of instruction, and that is reinforced by Appeal number 22-245, as well as the DOE's policies for duration of school year. And so IHO, if you believe any award is appropriate, then the DOE submits it should be limited to the 36 weeks of instruction that constitute a 10-month school year for which the student is recommended in its most recent IESP, or in the alternative IHO, if you believe a 12-month program is appropriate for the student, that it not exceed 42 weeks of instruction. So for all these reasons, IHO, the DOE submits that the program developed for this student in the 2023 IESP is the appropriate program for the student for the 24-25 school year, that the program implemented by the parent is so inconsistent with both the 2023 IESP as well as parents' preferred 2017 preschool IEP as to not be appropriate for the student, that it does not allow the student to make meaningful progress and is not specifically tailored to the holistic needs of this student for the 24-25 school year, and parents' requested relief should be denied on that basis. If, however, IHO, you believe an award is appropriate, then any award should be limited in accordance with the argument submitted herein. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. Mr. Foley, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. We generally rely on the arguments made in our opening statement, and just like to add that the evidence and testimony that was presented at this hearing show that the services for Goldie are being appropriately provided and that she's receiving her special education services. And in this case, it's very clear cut that the district had recommended these services and has not implemented any services for Goldie. So the parent entered into a contract for services based upon her last agreed to program. With respect to the district's argument that this should be analyzed under a Burlington-Carter analysis, we believe that this should not be analyzed under prong 2. This is not a unilateral placement, so I don't believe it's necessary for the IHO to analyze the appropriateness of the placement. The issue here is that the district recommended services for the child, does not have anyone to service the child, and then essentially tells the parent to figure it out. The district has essentially given the parent the right to go get an independent contractor to service their child and contract at the contracted rate. There's no issues of equities in this case, as the parent acted completely equitable with regard to their child's services. Therefore, any reduction of the contracted rate would be inequitable, as it would allow the DOE to benefit from not providing Goldie services in the first place, despite knowing that it was necessary for her. While the district asked the witness to speculate that the child would make progress with any services being provided, let us be reminded that the district has not provided any services for her. The parent and the student's providers believe the child continues to require an extended school year program and requires to receive 5 hours of special education services over a 12-month program. The parents requested services for the extended school year so that the child does not regress and has not received any response from the district. The parent challenges the most recent IESP from 2023 as the district did not consider and did not recommend an extended school year services for the child. Despite the district's contentions, the 2023 IESP did not expand the recommendations for the child, as it omits a recommendation for 12-month services. Further, any distinction between the manner in which Goldie's mandated services are recommended for delivery on her IEP and the way in which SICAN provides them could have been avoided had the DOE simply implemented the services it mandated in the manner it recommended they be delivered. Further, irrespective of any of the licensure that's held by Goldie's providers, you've heard testimony and have seen evidence that they are certified to teach students with disabilities, that they have experience teaching students in Goldie's age group and on her instructional level, and that the provider does indeed speak Yiddish, and most importantly, that Goldie's unique needs are being targeted during these sessions. And the testimony of Ms. Friedman, as well as the progress reports entered into evidence, demonstrate that Goldie is making progress and receiving benefits as a result of the work that she does with her provider. With respect to the district's argument that the AIR report determines the appropriate rate for this child, we would argue that this report takes into consideration costs for the New York City, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania geographic areas, which are extremely different than the costs associated with providing services in the 5 boroughs of New York City. The progress reports, as well as the testimony and the plan of remediation, speak to the progress that Goldie has made from receiving her services, yet how it is necessary for her to continue to receive these services. With respect to the district's note regarding the school term, Under the commissioner's regulation, the minimum school year is 36 weeks, and that's just the minimum. The child is in school for a 12-month extended school year, and without the additional services, this would equate to a denial of FAPE. And lastly, our witness, Ms. Friedman, has credibly testified in her affidavit and on cross-examination as to the appropriateness of the services and the rates charged for these services. Therefore, we would request that UIHO order the district to directly fund Yes I Can at the contracted rates for Goldie for the entirety of the 24-25 school year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The last thing we have to deal with is today is August 27th. We have a current compliance date of September 25th. How do the parties wish to proceed? Mr. Foley, you're muted.
Sorry about that. The parent would respectfully request, if necessary, an extension of the compliance timeline for purposes of the IHO to render a decision in this matter, noting that there's no harm to the child as she is currently receiving the services. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dolce?
DOE joins parents' request should one be necessary.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. If there's nothing further, we are concluded with this matter. We'll go off the record, but I ask that everybody remain on for a minute to discuss the next steps.
Off the record at 12:08.
Thank you. Okay, so it is, like the court reporter said, it is 12:08. Do we want to take a brief, I'd say like 20, 25-minute break and come back after